A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hi there, and welcome to another Good Life Conversation. My name is Jay. I'm the host of this show and the founder of Discover Year. Today's guest is Jennifer Fraser. Jennifer is an author as well as an entrepreneur. She wrote a book and started a website called the Bullied Brain.com, which you should check out. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me, Jay.
And so that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is kind of recent times for Jennifer. We might touch on some of the other really interesting and diverse things she's done over her life and career. But most recently, she's been focusing on authorship. And Jennifer and I met at a conference many years ago, and we connected by way of kind of some of our mutual interests. And I thought Jennifer's past was particularly interesting. And what I loved about it is that she does comparative literature is her background, and which means she does a lot of different things. She's interested in a lot of different topics, and she's proof that we don't have to choose one subject matter in our lives to be successful. So that's one of the things that I was attracted to with Jennifer, and she's been meeting with our students for a number of years. So I'm happy that she's here today, and she's got really relatable and important information with respect to bullying and the neuroscience of our brains and many topics that we'll touch on here. So let's dive in, Jennifer. Good Life Conversations. We'd love to hear about not just career, but life in general. So can you tell us a little bit about the day-to-day for you? What's a typical day for you? What time do you get up? Do you have morning routines? How much do you work? What's the nature of it? How do you wind down your day? What time do you go to bed? Just give us a snapshot of a day.
Yeah, because I work as an entrepreneur and I work in an international realm as an author and educator, my day can start very, very early. And it's usually because I'm speaking to somebody on the other side of the world. So for example, I had 6 o'clock in the morning, I had a call with someone who I work with regularly, and it's 9 o'clock his time. Every single Sunday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I have a regular meeting with people that are in Australia. So, and it's their Monday morning at 9 o'clock. So my day is unusual in that regard. And what I find is really important to do is, in terms of routine, I know that if I'm talking at sort of 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, I just have to start an hour earlier. I'm not the kind of person who can be sharp, just as I wake up. I need time. I'm very introverted, so I need time to just kind of gather my thoughts, drink my coffee, that kind of thing. But I also am really careful if I work on a Sunday, and I often do work on weekends, again, because of the nature of my work. I make sure I take time off during the week. I don't try to do 8-hour days like a regular person, 9 to 5, because my schedule's not like that. So if I start at 6 in the morning, there's no way I work until 5 or 6 at night, as if, I've got to get everything done. I think it's super unhealthy. And our society, with us all being on all the time with social media, kind of driving us to feel this compulsion to be up to date, I'm very careful with that. So I stay away from that type of perpetual onslaught. I don't need my phone with me all the time. I don't need to be available. I don't need to talk to people, And so I spend a lot of time doing things like being in nature, exercise, mindfulness, the classic sort of trio of self-care has to come first, or you can't be highly productive.
Okay, so it sounds like you might wake up at different times, and your days fluctuate quite a bit depending on what's going on. Can you give us a sense of like what's the type of work that you do as an author after you've released a book?
Well, being an author has all kinds of different phases. So, it's like being an entrepreneur in that you wear different hats. So when I'm writing a book, I'm usually doing a deep dive into research. So in comparative literature, we're trained to take different discourses or research-based areas like anthropology and literature and psychology and law, economics. We take them out of their silos, we put them into the arena, and then we see how the conversation changes. So I am not a scientist. And so it was a very big stretch for me to learn the science, to understand what the scientists knew about the impact of bullying and abuse on the brain. But that's what I was working on. So for a long time, and I'm just speaking years, I was working on that. I was studying intensive research, and then articulating it in a way that it could be practical and useful for regular people like myself and like everybody else who's not a neuroscientist. So I felt really strongly my goal was to get the information out of the lab and into the hands of people where we could use it. And that is nothing at all like the way my days are in the moment, because right now I do endless podcasts and meetings. I'm interviewed by media. I am asked to be on boards. I'm on LinkedIn. I go to Twitter. I advocate. I was brought out to Ottawa twice this year to speak to parliamentarians. I'm wearing the hat right now of being resident expert in a subject because I made it a subject. Nobody else was talking about neuroscience and bullying. And so all of a sudden, when I did, I had to be the person that really engaged in that space. And which is fine for me because I'm an educator, at heart. I love to teach. I love young people in particular, and I love teaching them. I learn a huge amount from them. So I do a lot of marketing type things. Like schools bring me out, I'll go and do an all-day workshop in Chicago, for example, which is what I did in the spring. Or Toronto Catholic School Board brings me out to address their superintendents. I mean, just really different things. Like every single day I'm doing something different, unless I'm in the deep dive research phase, which I try to stay in because that's kind of what I love to do. So even though my book is out, I can't stop myself from working on another book because that's just in my blood. So I try and carve out time as much as possible for writing, because writing is what I do and research is what I do. But I do understand there's no point in writing a book and if you're not going to get out there and market it. You have to.
So it sounds like what you love is the writing and the research and the learning, and then the marketing and the socializing, the relationships. That's kind of a necessary. Is it fair to say it's a necessary evil, or is it just not something you love but is okay?
The teaching and social connection with people I love. The marketing is a necessary evil. I don't think like a marketer. I don't like doing it. I hate doing that stuff, and I'm not good at it at all. I just don't do it. The shameful truth is I could be like building my email list and, creating a following and all that stuff that people do. And I look at them and I just think they're wonderful, but I couldn't be paid to do it.
Yeah. Oh, I connect with you on that for sure. You're a much better researcher than I would be, I think. But yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's important and useful for young people to hear from many of our mentors that they're extremely passionate about what they're doing. And at the same time, they don't love all the aspects of the work that they need to do to be successful or to be fulfilled. So that's important. But interesting to hear the variance in the work.
Yeah, I have to do, because I run a small business essentially as an entrepreneur, I have to do my taxes every year. Well, it is honestly like you do not want to be anywhere near British Columbia when I'm doing my taxes. That's how terrible it is, because I just am like a little black cloud floating around the atmosphere. I hate doing it so much, but I do it. And every single job I've had in my life, there's always been parts to the job that I don't like. And it's just a reality. And I think it's great for people to know that. I'm glad you really emphasized that point.
Yeah, I agree. It's the world we live in too simplistic terms. On the one end, where I think oftentimes people say, do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life, which I broadly ascribe to. I think there's parts of that are true, and then the other side is, oh, job's a job. You need to make money. You need to pay your bills. Just get a job, right? And I think the middle is the truth, where you do need money to live in our world, and also it's possible to really love a big portion of what you do. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I would love, so you mentioned a little bit about mindfulness, nature walks, I think meditation. And the next question that we like to explore before diving into work in greater detail is about your hobbies and pastimes. So I'm assuming that those are some of your hobbies and pastimes. Are there other things that you do?
I like to do, my greatest pastime, where I'm at my absolute zenith of happiness, where I'm in a flow state. And if you guys haven't heard that expression, flow state, it's literally, the best description of it is when you lose track of time and space. You're so deeply engaged, whether it's your sport or your hobby or your art, whatever. For me, that's writing, creative writing. So when I'm writing, I've written a couple of thrillers and I write poetry now. And I've been doing the duty of submitting it to contests and stuff like that. But I actually love doing it. And I get great creative and therapeutic benefits from doing what I love and what puts me in flow. So that would definitely be the kind of the key hobby for me is always around writing. I also love to read. I could read all day long. I love comedy reading. I love really serious books about health. I like to read novels, and yeah, I can just read anything. I could read all day long. Fantasy, sci-fi, you name it. I like to read it. I like music too. I love to go to an art gallery. Like I love to go to plays. Anything that I'm very creative. I like to be in that space of seeing human beings explore things in artistic ways. Really just is amazing for me.
So it sounds like there's this overlap of kind of writing and reading, which are essential in your work, and also you do as a pastime. But there's this distinction of creative writing versus what I am familiar with your work, anyways, is nonfiction. So is that like that separation of creative versus nonfiction writing? Is that what creates the hobby aspect? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so creative writing it's really almost a deep dive into your own imagination and your own way of seeing the world and articulating, and it's oftentimes has a deep-seated desire to connect with others because you can write a symphony, but if it's not being played by musicians and it's not being heard by an audience, it has no meaning. It's just black marks on a white page. So that's very much, I think part of fiction writing or poetry writing. I've dealt with some really challenging things in my life, and I've found that putting it into poetics, or especially poetry, I guess, it gives me a feeling of control over the narrative. I'm allowed to sort of tell my side of the story or be able to articulate something that's very inexpressible or painful. Poetry is amazing for that. And I think art in general is amazing for that. So, but when you're writing nonfiction, um, for me anyway, it's evidence based. Like there's not a thing in the Bullied Brain that has to do with my opinion. In fact, when it comes to I mean, that's my fourth nonfiction book. When it comes to scholarship, I'm just like super stringent, to the point where my agent said to me, when I gave him the first version of the Bullied Brain, he just got back to me and he just texted and went, "No one's going to read that book." I was like, "Oh, thank you." And he said, "It's because it's so academic." He said, "People that read these kinds of books, they want to know about you. They want to know your story, and they want to connect with you as a writer." I was like, "Really? Why? Who cares? Doesn't matter who I am. I literally see myself as a conduit for the research." So I had to go back to the drawing table, which I did, a great deal of lamenting and complaining. I went back to it took me over 6 months, 8 months, and I rewrote the book, telling it from the point of view of my own personal experience. And people tell me they love it. They're like, "This book is like a page turner on neuroscience. I love how you made it meaningful because you shared your own vulnerability." I just listened to them going, "Whatever. I just did what I had to do to, sell the book."
Well, count me among those people. I do love the books that infuse some personality amidst the research. I like the combination. I'm guilty of that for sure. So,
Well, you know what? It's a total brain thing. I mean, of all things, I should know this. The brain learns much better when it's in narrative form. And we all know that. We can read stacks and figures, and this is even very true for marketing. We can keep reading about the refugee crisis, but until we see a photograph of a 2-year-old face down in the sand and we see the story, and our brains instantly go, "Oh my God, that family's lost their little one in this way. How do I fix this? Where do I donate? How can governments change this?" Like, so our brains are very narrative. And I mean, it's silly for me that I had to learn it the hard way, but I did. And yeah, I try
yeah.
to write more that way.
We were talking before we started recording a little bit about your book release and what you learned in this experience so far, and you talked about some, what felt like a failure in a way, and this is interesting. And I think a lot of our audience members hearing this, thinking, okay, you spent months, possibly years, researching, writing this book, and the first message you get back, you send it in, and you cross your fingers, and the person says, "No one's going to read this." So, how did that feel? How was it helpful? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's funny. I think it's very true. I've made a number of failures with this book, and it's because gave my power away, is how I would best describe it. So when my agent wrote me back and said that, I know him well enough to know that, he just wasn't pulling any punches. Like, he respected me enough to just give it to me straight. And in academia, that's a typical way to be treated. So that didn't surprise me. I was like, okay, well, I have to fix it then. If this is not readable, it's like building a bridge that isn't safe. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to fix this. So I wasn't devastated by that. Where I made a really serious mistake, as you and I were talking about, was in marketing. I should have marketed the book and been very engaged and focused and invested in marketing with a proper professional publicist, etc., 6 months before the book came out. But the mistake that I made was not thinking for myself, not doing the proper exploration, not speaking to experts in the field, and depending, like sort of tied to the apron strings of my publisher. I figured my publisher was holding my hand and caring about me and was going to take me through this process. Well, they weren't. They're way too busy. They have limited resources. They've got 40 different titles, the person that was in charge of mine. And I gave my power away. I didn't take responsibility and I didn't do the proper work to be prepared, in fact, myself, for the launch of the book. And so I just wear that. That's all on me. And I know better next time. So if my next book gets published, I will hire the person, the publicist, 6 months before. I will work double time before the book comes out, because I really learned a powerful, important lesson. So, I mean, failures always, like, I love the positive psychologists say that we have to learn falling up. We all know what falling down feels like, and it doesn't feel good, but it's within us to turn that around always. And I'm sure you guys all don't want to hear some lesson about, failures or growth and whatever. None of us want to hear that, but it's true. And so you can turn falling down always into falling up. That's the brain learns by making mistakes, so you just have got to be tough about it and acknowledge the misery and the pain and the heartbreak and the rejection. And that's true, and that's emotional, and that happened, and it can never be denied. And it needs to be shared with all the people that care about you. But you got to dust yourself off. I mean,
yeah. I really like, there's so many things that you just shared that I would love to kind of expand upon with you. But I like this idea of the truth of, yes, it's going to hurt, and also you need to move on. Oftentimes I think people either it's hurt, it's too painful, or just suck it up, get over it, right? Again, like this kind of middle ground of, yeah, both are true, and they can be true, and they always have been true. So let's embrace it and understand which direction are we the person who's crumpling and saying I can never do it again, or are we the person that's ignoring our emotions? Most of us are one of those two basic people, I think. And I would love to know, for you mentioned in the world of academia, you've built up, sounds like, a resilience or kind of an understanding that this kind of direct communication is, this is not good. This is better. You're used to it. But I'm in our audience, 17 to, early 20 somethings. For their perspective, do you think you would have reacted differently if you wrote this book when you were 20 years old? Like, would you have had the same response to these failures, or would it be different?
definitely different. First of all, the adolescent brain is not mature until 24, 25. The adolescent brain is characterized by being extremely sensitive and vulnerable to social standing. I don't care about social standing. I'm in my 50s. I want to get my work done. I want to change people's understanding of bullying in the brain. That's what I'm laser focused on. That I'm a mother. Like, don't mess with my kids. But do I care about my social standing? Would it hurt my feelings in midlife? No, I wouldn't even think about it. If I was in my 20s, it could have been devastating. That could have been really harmful, because your brain is not fully mature. It can't even really see the future until you're 24, 25. That's when your prefrontal cortex, the part that looks to the future, that thinks about consequences, that's very reasonable and rational, it comes into full swing and is fully integrated to the brain at that time. So cut yourself a ton of slack up until 24, 25, or even a little older, some of the science shows, because you have this vulnerability and sensitivity. And I think it's incumbent on adults. Like, as an adult, I would never speak to a 20-something in the way that my agent spoke to me, because I would want to protect them. And that would be my job as an adult, is to make sure that the container around them gave them a place to turn post-traumatic stress. Your book is not readable into post-traumatic growth. You know what? It's not readable, and this is how you need to fix it.
Mm.
And you give the person a, I mean, and my agent did that for me. He said, this is what you need to do. He didn't say, I just don't like it. He said, this is what you must do. And I respect him. He's been in the business 30 years. I was like, then I will do it. So I think that's a brilliant question. And I fully agree that it is the middle ground. You do not want to just pretend that emotion doesn't exist. And on the other hand, you don't want to be ruled by emotion, right? It gives us so much important information to help us interpret and live well. So I like to use the analogy of like with the brain and the mind, like emotion is constructed by the brain. So I say, the brain is the engine, and it is the most fabulous engine in the world. We're so gifted to have it. It's incredible, but you never put it in the driver's seat. The only guy in the driver's seat ever is the mind. The mind listens to the brain, is very respectful, listens to the body, again, very respectful, but then the mind makes the mindful decision about what to do. The mind puts the brakes on, the mind gives you the gas. The brain, you do not want your brain ever in the driver's seat.
Very interesting analogy. Okay, thank you. There's just so many things we could talk about. I would love to, though, take a minute to, if you can capture or summarize the research that you did for the Bullied Brain. I think it would be so relatable and interesting to our audience and their parents, likely, and teachers. So tell us what you found out about the impacts of bullying.
Okay, so the most important thing that I found that shocked me to the core is that all forms of bullying and abuse. So it's a wide range that's normalized in our society. And when I say normalized, all you need to do is turn on the TV or go on social media, and you can see people in positions of power and prestige bullying others, abusing others even with impunity. So when I say all forms of bullying and abuse, I mean things that do not touch the body, like verbal abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, financial coercion, ostracizing, ignoring, emotional neglect, all of these things. This is now documented in extensive research. They do physical damage to the brain. They leave neurological scars. You can see it on a brain scan. So that is the bullied brain is about that, just saying, hey, we all need to know this. We think that bullying is a moral crisis. Well, actually, it is on one level, but it's a medical crisis. It's an infectious disease that's getting passed on generation to generation. So we are comfortable talking about being trauma informed, but we are not trauma responsive. And that's because we're not factoring the brain into the equation. So the key thing that everyone needs to know, kids and parents and teachers and coaches and policy writers, what we need to know is that, yes, all forms of bullying and abuse can do really serious damage to the brain. But the good news is, and this is the subtitle of the book, heal your scars and restore your health. The brain is innately wired for repair and recovery. If you've been bullied or abused, that doesn't matter, because you have within you the capacity, if you do evidence-based practices, and I spend all the book talking about exactly what the research says you need to do. It's not expensive. It's not difficult. It's very much about routine and what is your daily practice that you asked me about at the beginning. If we put in the daily practice to really care, the deliberate practice to care healthily for our brains, even if they've gotten hurt, sky's the limit. The brain is just remarkable to repair and recover. But what most people don't know is, now that we have non-invasive technology and we can see brains, they don't know that all forms of bullying and abuse actually are doing damage within the skull. And that's really, that's important. People blame themselves for bullying. They blame themselves for being victimized. And in fact, both individuals, the bully and the victim or the target, their brains are being simultaneously damaged by this aggressive, destructive behavior. And so this is why it has to change in society. I say it's an outdated paradigm because it's not grounded in science. There's no research. And we need to move into a brain-informed paradigm, which I call a neuro paradigm, all together. Like, we have to do it all together because we've all been caught in the normalized entrenched cycle. If you've had a brain wired to be a bully, then you will be and you think it's normal. You can't help it. And our society still, there's a really deeply ingrained belief that bullying is a necessary evil for greatness. So for people who don't understand how that works, I highly recommend, and I spend time in the book unpacking this. The movie Whiplash does a really excellent exploration of this whole idea. And I think it's chapter 3 or something in my book. I unpack how much of a lie it is. So
I've seen that movie. I've watched it again. I thought it was brilliantly done, if not sad. But okay, thank you. I mean, we could talk a lot about this, and I know that our students, when they have the opportunity to meet you, will have questions around this. But I know we have limited time right now. So I would love to know if you have a quick lesson that you've learned about relationships, whether it's about bullying or just your own experience. What have you learned that's important that you'd like to share about relationships?
So the phrase that I use to help people kind of tap into this, and I use it myself when I'm in situations like this, is I remind myself oftentimes that hurt brains hurt. So we tell our kids when they come to school and they're being bullied, we say, oh, there's a power imbalance, and this child is really hurting you. But if I was teaching elementary school and high school, I would teach the kids the opposite. I would say, the second you see somebody who's behaving in an aggressive behavior like that, they are waving a red flag of mental illness. They're in a ton of pain. They're suffering an extreme lack. They are not happy. They are showing you very visibly that they're driven to behave this way. It's like an obsessive compulsive way to behave for them. So imagine what you would feel like if you went to school or you went and joined a program, and instead of being excited about learning, instead of being curious, instead of wanting to make friends, instead of tapping into knowledge, you were driven to go and find someone, a target, to reflect you back as powerful. That's a really unhealthy brain. It's not a powerful one at all. And so this is one of the mistakes, I think, in the outdated paradigm that we really need to shift. So if someone is attacking you, if someone is putting you down, if someone is yelling in your face or berating you or claiming your work as their own or doing any of these aggressive, destructive behaviors, you have to recognize that the brain of the person is hurt and then make your next steps based on that. It has nothing to do with you. So don't take it on. They don't have any power. Really, you've got to navigate this from a place of recognizing that the other person, not that you're not holding them accountable. If we have the capacity to change our brains, and we do, we all have neuroplasticity till the day we die. We can all change our brains. We have more accountability now. We know that. If you behave in a way that's aggressive and destructive, really what you need to do is get a health intervention.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a different way of, and a great way of articulating something that we do talk about at Discover often. And we talk a lot about empathy, and what you're describing is just that active process of empathizing and being compassionate to someone. I always say that I've learned to first, have an instinct of saying, this person is being a jerk to me. What happened to them? That's the question that I find myself now. Finally, it took a long time, but what happened to them to make them behave this way? This is not a normal way to behave. Why are they doing this? And that helps me take a step back and decompress and be more mindful of other people's situations. But I think the part that you said about still holding them accountable is equally important, of course. And again, we're at this point where it's both things at once. It's not being compassionate or holding them accountable. It's both. And I think that's the theme that I've been hearing in this conversation, which I really appreciate it. And it's true in many areas, I think. So we're running out of time. I know that we always like to end the conversation. This is about good life conversations. Students are looking into their phones in today's world. They've been connected to digital technology their whole lives, and they're seeing this falsified world that's out there. They may be bullied. They may have people around them who are mistreating them. What advice would you offer for an adolescent, teenager, young adult to live a good life that's fulfilling and satisfying and meaningful?
The one thing to be very careful about, I think, especially in these days with technology, is you do not want to identify with the aggressor. So I call it in the book, developing a mind bully, where you start to become really hard on yourself. You start to feel really low, anxious, depressed. You put yourself down. You have to recognize that that's a brain strategy. Your brain's super smart. And what it's doing is it is identifying with the aggressor as a survival mechanism. It thinks that the aggressor is a predator. That's how the brain understands from evolution what's going on. And if you're doing all of the body brain signals that there's a danger or a threat, but you're just looking at your phone, your brain doesn't know that. It thinks you're looking into the face of a grizzly bear. So it's constantly preparing you to address that crisis by either fight, get aggressive yourself, even towards yourself, self-harm, or flight, just go into escapist mode and just try and disappear as best you can. And that's where self-medication comes in with alcohol and drugs, or freeze. You just get paralyzed. You can't do anything, can't get out of bed. Those are all really smart things to do, as animals know and as humans know, when you're under threat. Problem is, the threat is financial, or it's on the phone, or it's somebody putting you down. And so all of these mechanisms to respond to the danger are outdated. So you've got to get really knowledgeable about that. The more you can learn, it's a great podcast for young people, I think, to listen to. Well, anybody to listen to, and people love podcasts, is Huberman. I don't know if you guys, do you know his work? Yeah, what is it called? Huberman, just Huberman?
Oh, I don't know what it's called. Human Lab, maybe?
Huberman Lab. I think you're right. Yeah, he's a neuroscientist, and what he does is he takes neuroscientific concepts, but he just makes them practical. So you want to know about your brain, it's just that your society is not going to teach you right now. So it's kind of up to you to learn. But if you have any time at all with young people, I would highly recommend they get knowledgeable about what the research says, because it's empowering and inspiring.
Very cool. Thanks, Jen. I think I would love to talk a lot longer, but we'll keep it short for today. And our students, I suspect, will have good questions for you when they meet. So the theme for me today is about living in the complex world in which we find ourselves, which is often both empathetic and holding people accountable. It's moving on, but also accepting and acknowledging our emotions. I think that's really the important message that I'm taking away is to embrace the complexity and not seek this kind of ultra simplicity that we're often faced with in the media these days. So what an interesting career. Thanks, Jen. I look forward to, as always, catching up the next time and for you to meet our students this year.
I'm really excited to meet the students, and I'm looking forward to their questions. And I'm just happy to have the opportunity to be a little bit in teacher mode, because I miss that.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody.